Good morning, everybody, and again, I apologise for my comedy voice. Uh, the session this morning, I've got Raina here, so if I completely lose my voice, I might have to start doing hand signals for her to carry on.
Morning.
It's the two of us again doing our double act. And today we are going to be looking at writing a research proposal. So we're going through the research proposal process in much more detail that we sort of touched on yesterday. But before I start that presentation, has anybody got any questions or queries or issues that they'd like to mention this morning before we start? Thanks, Yenny. Yes, when I sent that email this morning, I sent an email this morning regarding the links for Monday's session and forgot to put the timings on it, so I apologise for that. I'll send a news forum, might write myself a note to remember to do that at the end of the session. I'll send a news forum with timings out at the end, but it's 10 till 12. And then 1 till 3 for the Q&A in the afternoon. So I'll send that out via the DLE later when we finish this session. Any other questions or queries? No, everybody completely, well, I won't say completely happy with what we were talking about yesterday, but sort of giving it some thought and spending some time thinking about some of the issues. A couple of other housekeeping issues. I regularly get emails regarding research and development training opportunities within the university. Some are physical sessions, others are distance learning opportunities. And as those come through, I'll probably just forward them to you for your information. If you want to access any of them, then that's great. But I did send one on to you this morning that came through today for me. So that's one thing. Secondly, I know Rona's going to share the dates for the dissertation module with you. The mic's on this one, yeah.
Okay. Morning, everybody. So the dissertation MCH 504 for 2017. The dates for the workshops are the 12th of September. The second one is the 20th of November. And the final workshop is the 13th of March 2018. They all start at 9:30. They run for half a day at the moment. However, the first one on the 12th of September, I'm hoping to run that for an extra couple of hours following input from previous participants, but I will let you know. The presentations will be in June, but I can't remember the actual date, but we don't need that for now. And I think that's it. Any questions about those? No? Okay, that's fine. We'll carry on. Any questions, just let me know.
What I'll do is Rona and I'll send that information out. I'll send that out with that information out via email as well, so you've got it in written form. So that's the dates for the dissertation module for next year, and also you've been invited, you as a module have been invited to the presentations for the dissertation module for this year, and those presentations happen on Wednesday the 7th of June, and I will be sending information out for you to look at to see whether you'd like to attend, and that's so that just for your information, and if it's possible, so you can come and listen to the people in the year above you, so sort of the cohort above you, and see what they've done and see if that gives you any ideas. But Rona and I'll put together an email probably after Tuesday with any sort of contact information and so on that you need and dates that you'll need in the future. So we'll sort of put out, I think, a joint, shall we?
Yes, good idea.
And that'll go out after Tuesday so that we can just do one big mail shot to you all. Yes, great, Polly, that's fantastic. It doesn't clash with any of your stuff, but if it does clash, then, you know, there are things that we can do to work around it. Emma, in response to your question regarding registering for 504, no, you don't need to register. You don't need to register until after this module has finished, but it's just so that you're aware of what's happening and when, because I know everybody has very busy timetables, so sometimes it's useful to have this information in advance. And again, I'll put some information about registering for 504 and what to do after Tuesday. So I think we'll just have a list of things that we need to put in that email. Okay, so some information, we'll send some information out. Yes, there's a comment from one of you about yesterday. There was quite a lot to digest, and I agree there is quite a lot to think about and quite a lot to digest, and you've got to start thinking early, because getting your research proposal sorted in your head actually takes quite a long time. It's not a quick process. This isn't the kind of assignment that you can drum out in a sort of quick fashion over a couple of all-nighters. This is something that you need to think about quite carefully. So yeah, there is quite a lot to think about. So any other comments or questions regarding sort of housekeeping or any other issues from yesterday? You'll note that I uploaded the 2 presentations, so they've already gone onto the DLE. The actual PowerPoints are there in physical form, and then the recordings of yesterday's sessions are there as well. And I checked to make sure that all the links were working and that the sound was working, and it was fine. So, good. Any other issues before we start? Yeah, I might suck a strapson in a minute. With my ridiculous comedy voice. Okay, so there are, if we go to our pretty DLE page, the information for today's session is under the gold unicorn, and there's the presentation from yesterday as well with the research methodology PowerPoint, and then the 2 PowerPoints for today are a single sheet called Research Proposal Outline and Writing a Proposal. So let's just have a little look at this first document. And I've got it downloaded, so I'm just going to close that. And this document literally is your headings. And I talked about that yesterday. So I talked about this yesterday about your headings. So what I'm expecting to see in this research proposal, and that is the list. You can adapt those headings slightly if you wish, and maybe put them in a different order if it works better for you. But those are the inclusion that I'd expect to see in your research proposal. And the abstract is not included in your word count, but it is quite a useful thing to start doing as an abstract at the beginning of your assignment. I think that can be quite useful, and it's a skill to develop, really. And one of the things that is also not included in your word count is this box at the bottom which says appendices. Now, a research proposal will require a whole host of appendices, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go through them. One might be that you put some of your inclusion and exclusion criteria for your literature in it, but other things will have to be in your appendices. And as we go through, I will say, and that needs to be in the appendix, and that needs to be in the appendix. So sometimes the research proposal itself looks quite small, but the appendix are quite vast. So there's quite a lot of, I know it's not marked as such, but they have to be there. So things like information sheets or an interview guide or an example of your questionnaire, those sort of things would be in your appendix, and they have to be there. And obviously your references, but those are the sections that are required for your presentation, for your proposal. So writing a research proposal, and hopefully just to ensure that you can all see the screen that I'm showing you at the moment. They're not saying yes or no.
No,
so
they're all asleep already.
Oh dear. Good. Yes. Lovely. So either waving or saying yes, which is great. Surely they should all be laughing. You'll be very pleased to know that my throat doesn't hurt, but it just sounds ridiculous. Okay, so we're talking about writing a research proposal. And, sorry. So we start off a research proposal with a title, obviously. Don't overthink this. Some people try and get, oh, very funny, thank you, Matt. You can send me emojis of little smiling funny faces there if you wish. So we start with a title, short, succinct title, keywords need to be evident, and think about what the focus of your piece of work is. Don't overthink it. People try and come up with quirky, interesting, funny titles. That's not necessary. It doesn't get you any extra marks. Just tell me what it is on the tin, sort of, really make it clear, short and to the point.
Can I just interrupt there? I was just going to say, when you come up with a title at the beginning of your work, it gives you a good focus for where you're going to go with the rest of it. But when you've completed the rest of the proposal, go back to your title and your abstract, because it needs to coordinate, because it will change. And I actually personally don't do my titles until the end, and the same with my abstracts. So get an idea, but don't worry about it too much.
Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree. Writing the abstract is usually the last thing I do.
It's my reward. That and the acknowledgements are my reward for finishing.
Yeah, you don't need to acknowledge anybody in this particular piece of work, but you might later. So we then go into the introduction. Some people call it the background, but in the section that I was talking about, I'm talking about the introduction, and it's a clearly defined a component on that marking guide. And this is where you're thinking about policy and background. Why is this particular topic important now? And why is this particular topic important to you? You're never writing in the first person. This is always presented in the third person. But you might say, as a nurse educator, this particular issue is key, or something along those lines. So why is it important, and why is it important to you? And this is where it's quite important to think about some current professional issues, either in terms of government reports, national guidelines, working parties, and so on. It might be in response to some media interest. If you're looking at competencies of nurses, you might want to refer to what's been said in the press. You might be referring to reports. So if you were talking about nursing competencies, you would have to. You couldn't talk about nursing competencies without talking about, for example, the Francis report, which has been one of the biggest reports on nursing competencies and nursing skills in the past 10 years. You might also refer to the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, government white papers, or any kind of World Health Organization strategy if you're thinking more broadly. Just to respond to a question. Absolutely, you might be talking about, yes, priorities regarding research priorities, absolutely. So this is where it's your opportunity to demonstrate to me that you understand where this particular topic sits in a national or local agenda. And it might be something that's particularly focused locally, that has been either isn't relevant or isn't in the national focus, but where it sits, either nationally or regionally. So that's your introduction. So we talked a little bit, well, we talked quite a lot actually yesterday afternoon about literature review, but also I just wanted to recap some of those things in terms of the research proposal. So this is where you are going to the literature, you're reviewing the literature, you're searching the literature, you are getting an understanding of what's been written. And that needs to be reflected, obviously, in the background that you've talked about. And you're showing off your ability to critically evaluate what's been written. Why is this so important? Because you have to justify your project. You have to put it in context, and you have to provide a starting point, either for other pieces of research, which is what you're going to do, but this piece of work needs to stand on its own 2 feet. It's not just simply part of the dissertation next year. It has to stand on its own as an academic piece of work. So it needs to have a real academic worth. And that's really what you're doing when you're setting the scene in a literature review. Excuse me. So as I've said there, the importance of that section can't be understated, really.
It provides us with the evidence of your underpinning knowledge for the rest of it, really, isn't it? And so if you can demonstrate your knowledge and awareness through the literature review, then we know that you've got a good understanding. And that is that overview that we talked about yesterday, so not the same as the 501. And then we have some confidence in where you're going to next, really.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say there is that the project will be unstable and will be of poor quality if you haven't set these foundations in place. It needs to, this particular section needs to demonstrate the worth of the piece that you're doing, and to acknowledge that the area that you're proposing to research is recognised and meaningful. And sorry, my extra squeaky voice there.
Yeah, that's all right. What you can say.
I'm just sucking my strepsils, sorry. So yeah, so it's not just repeating previous work, and that's what I'm saying. It's meaningful and robust, and it stands up on its own 2 feet.
And focused.
And focused, yes. So it should set the project in context. It should discuss past and current research. People talk about, one question yesterday was how many references, and another question I often get asked is how far back should I go? Can I include things that are more than 10 years old? Obviously, I'm one of those people, I'm reluctant to give a fixed date. I think if you're talking about certain pieces of research, you might have to go back a long time. If you talk about patients' recognition of pain and you don't mention sort of real seminal pieces of work like McCaffrey, which is, 1978, then you're not really demonstrating that you've got an overview of what's been said. So, and you might think, well, it was published in 1978, so how can it possibly still be relevant? Well, certain pieces of seminal work are always relevant, but tell me why it is still relevant. Demonstrate to me that you understand where it sits within that body of knowledge. Equally, if you're talking about another subject area where it's constantly changing and constantly evolving, you might want to set your flag at a particular date and say, if you talk, for example, about assessing critical care patients in the acute environment, go back to 1999, there was a comprehensive critical care document published by the Department of Health. Anything prior to that isn't valid anymore. It isn't worthwhile. So, but set that flag in the stone, as it were, and say, this is where I'm starting, and this is why I'm starting at this particular point. And so I'll never say to you, oh, it's too old or it's not relevant anymore. Demonstrate to me that it still is. And then I'm whether it was published in the 60s or the 70s. I mean, in education parlances, we still talk about Dewey's work, and that was published in 1928 originally. So, in terms of certain seminal pieces of work, it's perfectly reasonable to go back quite a long time. But it's about you critically evaluating what the past and the current research actually is. And as it says in the presentation, you should be able to identify how your project, therefore, will sit within or contribute to these wider issues. And I've got a really disgusting coloured diagram here. I don't know why I did it in this colour, and I will one day change it. But what I've done is this in this sludgy green is what I call the body of knowledge. So it's what's known in the world about a particular area. And a sort of undergraduate project sits right in the middle of that. I wouldn't expect a BSc project to break any boundaries at all. I want them right in the middle. You, as postgraduate students, are sort of sitting here on the edge, and this is what we were talking about yesterday, about it's okay to repeat, because actually what you are doing is you're sneaking over the edge maybe a little bit. And so I wouldn't expect you to completely reinvent the wheel. That's not the aim of a master's project. It's about reapplying, reinterpreting, reanalyzing knowledge in your particular field and applying it maybe to a slightly different group of people. And so, whereas a PhD project or a funded piece of national research sits outside that body of knowledge, and this is where we've got to be slightly more innovative and far more original.
Yes, it's very true. I think don't overthink the masters, do something you're comfortable with. The PhD is the one where, I mean, if you've got something that's original, absolutely go for it. There's no reason not to, but you don't have to. And I think we're not going to change the world with this one, and we don't with a PhD either, to be fair, but we do actually increase that body of knowledge, and that's what it's about. So this is, as I said yesterday, it's a bit of a training exercise really for the next stage.
So we're making that natural assumption that you all are going to go on to that next stage, which of course some of you may not wish to, but it does give you the opportunity to really establish yourself with the ability to research.
And understand research.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the joys of doing research and participating in research modules and teaching, for certainly on my particular perspective, teaching research, I find it fascinating. I find it really interesting, and I'm really quite passionate about it. And that actually makes my life quite a bit easier in terms of my doctorate, because actually that's the bit of my job that I really love. And you may find that this is something that you really enjoy. And I hope I'm going to rub off some of the passion on at least some of you.
I agree. I now get paid to do what I enjoy, or I did in my spare time.
So it can be really quite exciting. So guidelines, and I know I've said this before, but the literature review takes time, takes a lot of time, and so start as soon as possible. Start now, start taking notes, start reading stuff relevant all around your project idea, as well as your methodological approach. And so start reading, because the more you read, the more weight your project will have. I can pretty much tell from the introduction and the reference list how much somebody's read and how much background they've put into something.
It's quite a well-known fact that certainly as you go through to a dissertation, that if you have an external marker or somebody who's not known to you, they start with the reference page and the conclusion, and then start at the beginning afterwards. And it depends on how much that sort of grabs their attention as to how much attention they pay to the rest of it.
So think about that when you're writing your research proposal, as well as specifically, because I certainly do it. I read the introduction, and I read the end, and then I look at the references, and then I go back and I start marking it in detail. But I've already made I have an opinion of it once I've done that.
I agree. I do too.
So it's really important that you think about it. So again, just a few key points about your literature review. Passive tenses, no I, no we. This is written in the third person. This is a level 7 piece of work. So it's not I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. None of that. It's written as a researcher in the third person. Avoid abbreviations, avoid jargon. Make sure you are writing well in plain English, because you've got to remember that a research proposal from the very beginning is a recipe. So if you don't tell me what you're going to do and it's muddled and it moves around too much, then I'm not going to be able to do it. So you've got to think that you're writing this research proposal for somebody else to undertake. So this is a set of guidelines for somebody else to pick up this proposal and do it themselves. So if it doesn't stand up on its own, and there's all sorts of background information that isn't clear on the page, then I'm not going to be able to do this project. And that's really important in terms of research proposal.
Going back to picking up from some of the things on the 501 that we marked as well, and writing in the passive tense, using phrases such as the researcher and the author isn't absolutely necessary either. Avoid it if you can. It sort of it halts the flow of what you're reading, really. I read some with paragraphs that were a page and a half long, so some good paragraphs that are signposted well would be good. Titles, and I know sometimes people aren't aware that in postgraduate work we expect titles, but we absolutely expect titles to guide the reading. Make sure you've got your heading, because that was missing sometimes as well last time. And punctuation, read through. My advice is always read through things out loud to yourself. Sounds a bit nutty, I know, but when you pause, take a breath, you need a comma or something in there so we don't have long sentences. And it might sound petty, but we are at level 7, and my expectation is that we have that standard.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not expect grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, reference errors, or poor English at level 7. And although that doesn't sit in the marks, unlike undergraduate work where I might put a section 10, 20 marks for grammar, presentation, and so on. In postgraduate work, I don't do that. As a postgraduate team, we don't do that. And the reason we don't do that is because we expect it to be there. So if that isn't done and it's done poorly, then I'm probably taking 2 to 5 marks out of every section.
Yes, I agree.
So just think about grammar and spelling, and I know it's probably slightly petty now, but it becomes not necessarily more important, but it becomes, if it's poor, it's really detrimental to your mark.
It is, because it represents an image of you haven't taken care over it, or it inhibits the reading of it, so that makes it difficult for us to mark as well. And if that goes to anybody that's external, so when we move to next year, if something's got a lot of typos and those kind of errors, the first thing they think of is, well, this person hasn't cared about their work, it's sloppy, so what else is wrong with it? And then they start to look deeper for the errors, whereas if it's presented well and it reads quite well, they don't look for those errors quite so much.
Absolutely. Okay, so
that's enough.
Enough on that.
Enough on that soapbox.
Any questions at that point? Well, I'm finishing my strepsil.
I think we've frightened them all off now.
I have my mother is an English teacher, and I used to write her letters and write her postcards and things when I was at school, and she used to give them back to me with red pen.
Well, that's a bit harsh.
So I'm not going to send them back to you with red pen, but anyway. Okay, so that's the literature review section. So just some brief tips, and I think we've covered all of those. Reference correctly, use articles and books to help you search. Know when to stop, because people sort of get halted on this section and then they don't move on. there is a point where you've got to go, okay, I'm going to stop now and I'm going to move into the actual proposal bit. And as you'll know from the weighting of the marks, the proposal bit is more important. So you need to move on. So there needs to be a point at which you go, okay, I'm going to stop now and I'm going to get on with my proposal. So I think, yeah, there's some just key points there. Yeah. So we then move on to the proposal bit. And the first proposal, the part of the proposal, is the aims and objectives. This, I can't, it's unfair in a way because it's actually only one slide on this presentation. But I'm sure I made the point yesterday, and I can't emphasize enough that actually this is the bit that sets you up for the rest. An aim that is well written with a broad purpose, not too long, but clear and focused. And I have to look at the aim and say, yeah, I know what she's going to do, what he's going to do. I know what this project's going to be about. I know what this project is going to do. So you need to be really clear in your aim, that you know what you're going to ask, who you're going to ask, and how you're going to ask them. So what is it you want to find out? So some of you have sent some ideas. It's really great that you've got some really clear ideas about what you want to do, but have it absolutely clear and concrete in your head. What do I want to find out? What is it that I'm going to be trying to discover or investigate or test or whatever it is that you're trying to do? And then you move on to the objectives, and this is where you break down your aim into smaller component parts. And that might be indicative of multiple methods that you intend to employ. So using a questionnaire, the research will examine, and using an interview, the research will explore. So using those two different methods of data collection and dividing those into distinct objectives, but moving into deliverable, achievable objectives. So when I get to the end of your research proposal, I look back at those aims and objectives and go, what she has then, or he has then gone on to discuss, will do what they said at the beginning they were going to do. So it has to match.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where I keep going back about nothing will be set in stone until you've completed the whole cycle of it. Because you have to keep going back to make sure so that the rest of the research proposal element with your methodologies, methods, matches your aims, which matches your literature review, which matches your question at the beginning as well. So it all has to fall into place. But don't expect to just go in and write it as an essay as we have done previously. It's always a referring back process.
Yeah. So the aim that you might have in your head now may change, may evolve, may become much more focused, and actually the more focused it gets, the better. So this is where you've got to be realistic about your timeline, think about what you can actually achieve. Now, although this isn't the research proposal for next year, if you are going to go on to next year, you've got to start thinking about it in terms of a calendar year as a project. So if I was going to undertake this and you then suggest in your aim that you're going to interview 45 people, you're never going to interview 45 people in the time frame that you've got. So if you set your time frame as the one calendar year and use that as a model, and then you tell me that you're going to interview 45 people and analyse in-depth interviews of 45 people, that's just not going to happen.
The transcription alone will take you forever.
So just think realistically and practically. For my first masters, I interviewed 12 people, and actually that was possibly more than I think I bit off more than I needed to.
Quite a lot.
12 people was a lot, and it was quite they were probably hour and a half interviews, and I had 12 of them, and they were enormous pieces of work for me to manage. And I remember my research supervisor saying to me at the time, well, could you stop at 8? And did you not think 8 is enough? And I was like, oh, no, I was very pig-headed. And I said, no, I need to do a few more because I'm not absolutely sure I've got enough thematic analysis to go. And I think she was right. I think I could have stopped at 8. And you think to yourself, you might be thinking at home now, 8? That's not enough. That's not enough of a bigger sample.
It's plenty.
And I had really defined my sample quite closely. I wanted newly qualified staff nurses who'd worked on a surgical ward for less than 6 months. So I had quite a small group of people that I was pulling from, and I wanted to find out their attitude to a specific thing. So therefore, to interview only 8 would have been perfectly reasonable. So I've got a question. Okay. Well, I think a simple answer to that, Matt, is yes, of course it could.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because you really don't know what although you might have an initial idea and you might have a thought that you want to inquire about a specific aspect, but actually once you've looked at the literature, firstly, that initial idea might be resolved or not eliminated, but the need for that inquiry might not be so clear. But equally, a literature review could possibly take you in a very different direction. So yes, absolutely, I agree. You could quite radically change. Yeah, well, I think to ask why people attend a minor injuries unit with an illness is too broad. Rather than focusing it specifically on chest pain, what might be a different slant is to look at a specific minor injuries unit over a specific period of time. So rather than say, I'm just going to look for chest pain patients, because you're absolutely bound to pick 2 weeks for data collection and not a single chest pain patient comes in.
Very possible.
And that's what I mean about looking at your research aim and objectives in a practical manner. And maybe saying to have a snapshot of why people attend a minor injuries unit over a specific phase, a specific time, and maybe just canvass that group of people to see what broad themes come through as to why they're attending, rather than specifically looking for a specific disease or complaint. I don't know what you think to that.
I think that's a good idea, because that way you are capturing everything that's not a minor injury, but within that time frame, because otherwise it's too vast. Because what is an illness? Is we're looking at mental illness, physical illness, etc., etc. Are you looking at children? Are you looking at adults? All of those things. So 2 weeks would be really interesting, actually.
So it might be, and one of the things about that data collection is that data collection has already been done for you. So in a way, what you could do is you could say, I want to look at your minor injuries unit will always record, I don't know whether they always do, but I know certain minor injuries unit already record why a person has come on that day. So what's brought you to this unit today? And so that piece of information is already available to you. So what you could do, and this is, I don't know, Diane, are you coming on Tuesday? Yes, I think I've got you down as a yes, haven't you? Because what we could do is we could really unpick it, and we could maybe look at what brought people to a minor injuries unit for 1 week in September, 1 week in February, 1 week in June, because of course there will be seasonal varieties. Look and see if there's a thematic, because that data will be available for you to retrieve historically, and then unpick that and maybe group people together and have a focus group on a small group of people who've come for a specific complaint. Or there could be a second phase of data collection once you've looked at that historic data, So there may be, things that you can do where, because of what you do and because of where you work, you might be able to retrieve pieces of information quite easily and then do a specific piece of data collection to reflect that.
Yes, I agree. I think you'd have to tighten up your week or whatever it was, if it's including weekends, out of hours, public holidays, etc., because that will change the focus again because of the availability of GPs, etc. So it does depend.
Yeah. And there will also, with minor injuries units, and I know from research that's been done previously about accessing emergency departments, those sort of factors are really influential. Equally, so are the seasonal changes, people accessing the service over the Christmas and January are different from those accessing the service in July and August. So, we might look at it from a seasonal perspective, we might look at it from a demographic perspective, we might look at it from a specific age group. So why are people between the ages of 45 and 60, 65, 60 and 75, 75 and above? Equally, you might look at those groups and you might do some comparisons. So there's all sorts of different things that you could do. But looking at that area, so your literature review might be about accessing services at a particular time, but then we refine in the aims and objectives it to a very specific group of people. So, well, that's a difficult question. Michelle's asked how long is the time period for data collection to then be able to do the analysis? Well, there's a lot of that depends on. So firstly, that depends on what your method of data collection is. So if, for example, you choose to use a questionnaire and you want to send a questionnaire to a group of people and you want them to return it, that if you look at research historically, you send people questionnaires, they don't fill them in.
Yep.
So how are you going to actually physically do it? So you need weeks to respond, and then maybe send them a reminder, and then it might be about how many questionnaires do you need to get back to make it a valid sample. So if that's your chosen method of data collection, you might need quite a long period of time, but equally, you might be able to send that out quite early and have a certain repeat, but sort of phases of it. If you're going to interview people, then you need to plan quite a long time for that. So, and this is why we were talking yesterday about getting ethics early so that you can start data collection as soon as possible, because to get the analysis done in enough depth, you really need to be starting to think about analysis and finishing your data collection by the end of February, beginning of March. And so if you look at that in terms of a timeline, that means you need to sort of get on with it, for want of a better word. If you're going to do focus group interviews, although they happen on a fixed time, it's about planning them, when the people that you want to invite can attend. So there's all sorts of logistical things that you need to think about. But my sort of benchmark would be that by March, you have completed your data collection in terms of working in a calendar year. Do you think that gives them enough time?
It's still tight.
Yes, it's still
very tight. So over the summer, when you're working on your ethics, work on your literature review as well as a starting point. So that gives you a bit of a focus. If we get the ethics in for September, I would hope you would have your data collection done by just after Christmas or thereabouts. The analysis does take quite some time. Just doing transcriptions alone do, and then you've got to look for themes, and then you've got to try and unpick those themes to see what they mean. So there's quite a lot of work in there. So it's the master's dissertation is a tight year.
Yeah,
it's a very tight year.
And what I would definitely expect you to have thought about this in your research proposal and have an idea of a timeline. So in your appendix, certainly there would have to be a flow chart, a Gantt chart of your timeline for your research. Whether you're going on to 504 or not, it still has to be there. And so work on that idea of 1 calendar year.
And if you are going on to the 504, this is a really good exercise for planning for next year, so use it well.
Yeah, because equally, in terms of planning for next year, think about your own personal lives and workloads and think, okay, when am I going to need to have some time? This might be your opportunity to present this Gantt chart to your line manager and say, you know, if you want me to do this dissertation, you need to give me some additional time. I'm thinking about some of my academic colleagues who might think very carefully about their timelines and think to themselves, oh, actually, my line manager has asked me to do that module in that phase, and can I move that? And really think very carefully about what you're going to be up to. And those of you who don't work in academic circles, think about what your workload is like and think about planning for next year. So it's really important that you get this timeline so that you don't get sent to Belfast to do courses while you're trying to work. I'm thinking of one specific member of the audience there. He knows who he is. Was it Belfast? Was it certainly Ireland somewhere, wasn't it? I'll have to see if he's still awake, you see, because he knows who he is.
Asleep.
I think he is asleep.
Okay.
For 2 years. When's that 2 years up? You see, he was awake.
Yay!
Oh, right. So basically, just as you're trying to finish this dissertation, so that's absolutely marvellous. That's just perfect timing. Oh, somebody says they can't hear you, Raymond, so you might have to talk louder.
Talk louder. I always talk quietly.
Okay, right. So aims and objectives. Any other questions on aims and objectives? One of the key things to say is this is what we're going to spend predominantly our time doing on Tuesday. Physically, if you're with us or if we're Skyping, this is what we're going to be really unpicking and really refining down, because if you get this done sort of now in this module, in this sort of this week, the next bits fall into place quite nicely, and so you can plan them quite well. So we will spend a lot of time on Tuesday looking at your individual aims and making them very clear and focused and shrinking them to fit a master's dissertation. Because historically, and I've been doing this here at Plymouth for a couple of years and did it in my previous institution as well, is that people come with these fabulous ideas that are great, and then we shrink them to fit a master's. Because people have these fabulous ideas, but they are actually really enormous. And I think people, when we boil it down, it becomes quite clear how big a proposed project might be. So it needs to be really, really focused.
I agree with that. And I'd also say, come on Tuesday with your ideas, and if you have the opportunity to just send them through to myself or Rachel or both of us, just so we've got a heads up really of what you are thinking about, that gives us a chance to have a think as well. So because for myself, I don't know about Rachel, but I tend to sort of ponder for quite some time on things and wait for my light bulb moment, and it's just helpful. If you can't, don't worry, we can talk on Tuesday.
Yeah, but I know some of you already have,
Yes.
but once I've got some time, either tomorrow, today, later today, or on Monday, I'll probably print out the people that have sent their ideas through, so we've got a physical copy to work on. So if you are thinking of sending me something, then send me a brief, it doesn't email or Word document, just type out your idea, and that'd be useful.
Nothing lengthy, just some basics.
Yeah. Right, so then we go on to the methodology section, and this is making it clear and very, very explicit what approach is going to be taken to this research question or statement. So if your aim and objectives are clear, it should then follow on, and you set out your ontology and your epistemology in this section. We talked about this yesterday, but this is when it's very important that you've thought about what your personal ontology and epistemology is, and what the ontology and epistemology of this project is going to be, so that it's clear and explicit from the outset. So what is the view of the world, and what stance will you be taking as a researcher? So in terms of how you are going to undertake it, where are you going to sit as the researcher? Are you going to be involved in the data collection, an active part and participant in the research process, undertaking an interpretive study, or are you going to be a detached observer doing a quantitative positivist piece of work? And it needs to match your aim and objectives. It needs to be clear. And so spending some time thinking about the ontology and epistemology that you want to take, and doing some reading around. And if it is a piece of ethnography, for example, that we mentioned yesterday, have a look at other ethnographic studies. They don't need to be even related to your particular topic, but have a look at how an ethnographic study is done, how other people have done those pieces of work. If you're going to use an experimental design, look at other people's experimental designs. If you're going to do a piece of phenomenological interviewing, have a look at what phenomenological interviewing might look like in a piece of research. So spend some time thinking very carefully about what you are going to be looking at. So, question? Yes, absolutely it does. Yes. So the question was, does the ontology and epistemology need to be explicitly stated in the proposal? And my simple answer to that is yes. And I would advise, I mean, that at this stage you actually say the ontology of this proposal will be, and the epistemology of this proposal will be, so that you have made it absolutely clear to the reader that you have thought about these issues, and you've stated what they're going to be, and then obviously I'm going to be looking then to make sure that that's what you have actually done. But having those ideas firmed up in your head will help you enormously in the planning and sort of execution of this proposal, and even more so next year, if you know what stance you're taking, what theoretical stance. So this might be an opportunity to go back and look at some of the research texts that you've looked at, and look about, what ontology and epistemology is, so you've got it absolutely clear in your head.
No, nothing further to add. No, I think so. It just means that gives us an opportunity to be assured that you understand where you're coming from, and if you understand that, then hopefully the rest of it will follow. And for next year, that's very important.
So at this stage, it isn't enough to say this is a qualitative piece of work. Full stop. That is not sufficient. At master's level, that would not pass muster in this section.
No, it probably wouldn't pass me for an undergraduate either, to be honest. I would be concerned even at that level. You need to know a little bit more, even at undergrad.
Yeah. So at postgrad, I'm expecting quite a bit more.
Just to demonstrate an understanding.
So you've done the methodology section, and then we then move on to the study design. This in different research proposals and in different studies, this section is called lots of different things, and I don't really mind what you call it, whether you call it study design or whether you call it methods of data collection, whatever you call it. But I mean, I've called it design here. I think in the guidelines I called it methods of data collection. But this is the same thing. So this is where you're outlining your main approach, so quantitative or qualitative, which you've already made explicit in the section before. So this is where you go on and describe or discuss and analyse what it is, what the approach is that you're going to take, what you're actually going to do. This is where you're outlining your study's intent. So is it going to be a longitudinal cross-sectional study? What methods of data collection are you going to actually use? And how is that going to answer the question that you've asked? So if you tell me in your research aim that you're going to explore perceptions, and then in your study design you talk about observing somebody or undertaking a questionnaire, then I'm going to think to myself, well, you're not actually going to be able to do what you said you were going to do at the beginning. So this is where your study design needs to be very clear, very explicit, and this is a real outline of your plan, but it needs to reflect your methodology and your research aims. And make it absolutely clear what you're going to do. So whether you're going to use a questionnaire, and then an example of that will have to be in the appendix. Are you going to use an interview, semi-structured interview or structured interview, or open interview, in which case an interview guide would need to be in your appendix. And when I'm looking at that appendix, I'm going to be saying to myself, does it do what they said it was going to do? So if you're going to ask, the questions that you're going to ask in the interview need to be clear and clearly stated. So if you are going to, for example, use an interview or a questionnaire, you're coughing now.
No, I think I got it before me.
If you're going to use an interview or a questionnaire, test it on some friends. You don't need ethics to test it on yourself. If you ask that question, would you get the answer that you are trying to find out about? If you ask your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever, the question, and they come up with a completely different answer than you're expecting, then you haven't phrased the question correctly. And I'm sure you've all come across examples when you've read either a questionnaire or you've been interviewed and you've told them something, and they look surprised, or you look at a questionnaire and you go, I don't know how to answer this question. So make sure it's clear and explicit. It's really, really important that this does what it's planning to do. So you might want to use diagrams, you might want to use an illustration, all sorts of tools that you can use to help me understand what you're going to actually do. If you're going to do a focus group interview, for example, which is a challenging and complex method of data collection, but can be incredibly useful, how are you going to facilitate it? How are you going to manage it? And then how are you actually going to collect the data? So if, for example, you're doing a focus group, are you going to video it? And if you're going to video it, you need permissions. If you're going to interview people, are you going to record them? Again, you will need permission. If you're going to record an interview, then how are you going to get that recorded interview into the written text? Is that your intention? So are you going to transcribe it? Are you going to transcribe it by hand? All sorts of things need to be thought through, and those need to be outlined in your study design. So if you tell me you're going to do something, how are you going to do it? How are you going to manage it?
I've got two things to add to that. The one is if you're doing, whether you're doing questionnaires, interviews or focus groups, is how you're going to recruit your participants. So we need to know how you're actually going to, you got that there, yeah, we need to know what you're going to do about how you're going to recruit it, so whether it's snowballing, etc., etc. And the other one is, I don't know whether here they have to include a copy of a consent form that they would do, so consent as well.
So in terms of, so that's the tool. So what Rona is alluding to there is your sampling strategy. So that needs to be an explicit section in the study design. And I know in the headings that I have in the other list, yeah, there's method design and then there's sampling. And I've also put in there access. which is about recruitment. So in terms of sampling, what's going to be your sampling strategy? So if you're a positivist, you might be using randomized sampling, but how are you going to randomize those samples? How are you going to get access to that sample? If you're looking at a qualitative study and you're going to use convenient sampling, how are you still going to access and recruit those people? Are you going to write to them? Are you going to give people, for example, going back to, I think it was Diane's, about why people are coming to a minor injuries unit? Are you going to give them an information sheet when they attend? Is that going to have a contact number on it that's going to ask them to call you or return a I will participate form? And then there needs to be a consent. So all of these things need to be thought of. So there's quite a lot of complexities around sampling. And as we go through the module, you might come back to me with specific questions. And this is where we will help you and assist you in devising these strategies for sampling. But you need to clearly outline what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And that needs to be achievable and it needs to be realistic. So in answer to your question, Jenny, then yes, there will need to be an information sheet in the appendix. There will also need to be a consent form in the appendix. And actually, I know that Pam on Monday is going to talk more about information sheets and consent forms. And what's quite helpful is that she's got the link to the template for the one that the university recommends you use. So a lot of the information is there for you, and you just need to adapt it for your own purposes. But I would expect an information sheet and a consent form to appear in your appendix. Is it more straightforward to our professionals and colleagues? Yes, than our patients. Claire, yes, it is. Yes, and that's a simple answer. And one of the biggest reasons why it is easier to talk to fellow professionals and students and other colleagues than patients is that the ethics is much tighter. You all will have to go through an IRAS process or an ethics process, but the scrutiny that you will have to go through if you want to ask members of the general public anything, patients, anything, then is much tighter than it is, obviously, than it is than colleagues. Well, no, obviously, I'm not saying that we don't care if you ask colleagues, but there is a less stringent requirement. And equally, if you're going to ask students something and you work in the university, you still have to go through the full process. But IRAS is less stringent. Yes, it's a form, but what we've got a form of IRAS, there are sort of, it's a bit difficult to explain, but there are basically, you tick yes or no to a particular question and it takes you to one branch of the form. It's all done electronically. And if you tick yes, I am talking to members of the general public, in the form, it takes you down a different pathway. But what's great is that we've got Pam Baxter, who's our ethics lead, coming to talk to you on Monday, and she's delivering a fixed resource session in the morning. Claire, you weren't with us yesterday, so we did talk about this a little bit then. She's going to talk about that in detail, and then we're doing a Q&A in the afternoon with Pam regarding specific ethics issues that you might have. So there will be different ethical issues regarding professionals and colleagues than there are from patients. So hopefully that answers all of your questions. Did it answer your question, Jenny? Now, none of this is set in stone in the fact that, and then there will need to be some flexibility, so it might change, but this is always where you've got to look at how you are actually going to do it. So imagine when you're writing this research proposal that you were physically definite, you were definitely going to do it. I mean, hopefully you are, but write it as if you are. So talk about sampling, talk about your sampling strategy, and indicate how many. And that, again, that doesn't need to be fixed in stone. So if you are thinking about interviewing, you might say, I want to interview between 6 and 10. That gives you a little bit of scope. Nobody's going to say, well, you haven't, so you fail. But it's giving an idea. And if you say, I want to interview 6 to 10, say why. So what will that do? What is the scope of the study? And if you're going to do field work, for example, how are you going to access that? Field work is really useful and really a vital method of data collection, but how are you going to access it? Whose permission do you need? If you're going to go out and watch people in practice, what permissions do you need from the local area, from the particular people that you're watching, and so on? How are you going to manage that in terms of timing? So all of these things will need to be thought about. Okay.
No, I think that's probably enough just now.
Okay, so in terms of methods, you're describing the study location, the subjects that you've chosen, you're describing the design of the study's instruments. So as I said, the questionnaire, observation schedules, whatever. You might talk about doing a bit of pilot work. Not essential, but if, for example, you are going to use a questionnaire, you might mention that you're going to test that questionnaire with a small sample initially. Questionnaires are notoriously complex to manage. You might sound like they're the easy method of data collection, but they're really not. And you send a questionnaire to a small group of people to make sure it's working, and you find out that the language doesn't work, or that the order of questions doesn't flow, because it might flow in your head because you've got lots of background knowledge, but it doesn't flow in the participant's head. If, for example, you were going to send a questionnaire to a group of patients, you've got to ensure that you've used language that all patients will understand. And if you're sending it to patients, what are you going to do if the patient can't read, can't write, doesn't speak English as a first language? Are they going to be excluded from your sample? What will that do to the legitimacy of the data that you're collecting, and so on? So, and if you're talking to students, are they just telling you what you want to hear, for example, because of the relationship that you have with them? All sorts of things that you've got to think about in terms of ethics and practicalities. And so, although pilot work is not essential in terms of your dissertation, but it might be worth thinking about, if you're going to use a specific tool, how you might go about making sure it does what it says on the tin.
I would also add to that particularly if you're interviewing students or something like that, there's a potential for bias there, so it's something else you need to think about. And the same with questionnaires, because you'll ask questions that may be leading it that you want a specific answer to, so that's a good reason to test them as well.
I don't know if anybody's planning on interviewing it, but I know there are a few members of staff on the module, and one thing the ethics committee will mention almost definitely is about your power relationship with this group of students, and so you must give that some thought. Yes, Claire, you make a very valid point about sending out a postal questionnaire. You post things, you know what people are like. I know what you are like personally, because I know how many of you filled in your module evaluations for last time. I'm going to pause there. If you were in the room, I'd be giving you all a really, really dirty look. People don't do it. People don't do questionnaires. So if you are asked to do a questionnaire, even if you are begged incessantly to do a questionnaire, people don't do it. So if you send them something, they won't. All right, nobody likes a creep. Thank you. I'm sure I know some of you did, but there were 51 people on the module. I didn't get 51 responses, is all I'm saying. No judgment. If you send people a questionnaire, then there is a there is a likelihood that they're literally going to bin it, or they're going to ignore it, or they're going to, yeah, I'll do that later, and they'll forget about it. The issue of doing the questionnaire in person has a whole different set of issues. And again, ethics may talk to you about coercion. So if you're sitting there and you hand somebody a questionnaire and you stand over them while you do it, is that questionnaire then going to be biased? Because they're going to quickly do it in front of you, and there's no anonymity then, because you know who's filled it in. So even if they haven't put their name on it, you know who filled that one in. And this is, again, I'm using an example of students. If you were all physically in the room at the end of MCH 501 and I'd handed you a physical piece of paper, stood there and waited for you to complete it, and then taken them all back from you, you would have possibly done what lots of students do, is mix them up quickly so I can't track who's written what because there's no names on it. But there is an element of being able to detect who has filled them in. So all of these sort of slightly, you might think, bizarre complexities really need to come into the research proposal, and you need to make it absolutely clear that you've thought about all of these issues. You may not be able to resolve any of them, but it's essential that you've thought about them and you've maybe articulated a strategy to overcome some of these possible problems. So you might say, postal questionnaire is difficult because there won't be addresses available. Therefore, I'm hoping to do it in person, or the research will be undertaken on a one-to-one basis. But I understand that might cause a degree of coercion, and therefore I'm going to allow them some time and space to do it in private, allow them to return it to me in a sealed envelope, so that there is a practical set of strategies that you've articulated that would overcome some of those problems.
I would probably just add to that, going back to the idea of doing a postal questionnaire, that yes, some people will throw that in the bin or lose it, but there is the potential for a bias again with that, because some people who have got a strong opinion one way or the other are more likely to fill it in rather than just your Joe Blogg's average on the street. And I would use my mother as a perfect example of that when it was the Voices questionnaire, the palliative care one. She had very strong opinions and she filled it in. She never fills anything else in normally. So there was a bias to why she was doing it, so just be careful of them.
Yeah, patient opinion equally. Anybody, and this is one of the things that you need to articulate, you understand when you're talking about sampling and recruiting samples. The people who want to participate in research are a certain group of people, and one might argue that they are not representative of the general population. And actually, the people that articulate their responses in research in any way, patient opinion, for example, are the people who've had fantastic experiences or absolutely dreadful experiences. And patient opinion is an absolute typical example of that. And if you look at the patient opinion website, you can see quite clearly how it's fabulous or it's absolutely rotten. Now, if you think about the thousands of people who access the NHS every day and who say nothing, because it was just okay, wasn't it? It was fine. They've got nothing particular to add. But people who respond to questionnaires tend to be the poles of opinion. And so when you're analysing that, you need to keep that into account, and you also need to maybe look at strategies that you might want to overcome that, if possible.
Yes, I don't know if it's possible.
I don't know if it is possible. But then no piece of research is perfect. There's always some element of flaws or complexities that need to be addressed because it's a real life scenario. But what we're saying in this research proposal is that it's just so important that you articulate that you've thought these issues through. So I talk about and describing your method of data collection. So what exactly are you going to do? We then go on to another. So you've collected all the data. There you go. You've got it all, whatever it is. In the research proposal, you then need to articulate what you're going to do with that information. How are you going to analyse it? how are you going to unpick what people have told you or people have sent back to you, and what you're going to do with it? So are you going to employ some quantitative analysis, use some statistical tool to get some descriptive or inferential statistical and empirical information from your data? Or are you going to undertake a content analysis, a constant comparative analysis, a thematic analysis, so that you've thought through what exactly you're going to do? And that's going to be absolutely dependent on what data collection tool you've chosen to employ. So if you've chosen to interview people, there will be certain data analysis techniques that will be open to you, and vice versa. So but one of the most important things that you need to do is to convince me, or Rona, or whoever else is marking the assignment, that the analysis that you've done has addressed your aim and objective at the beginning. So this is when you need to go back and say, okay, once I have done this statistical analysis, or once I have done this thematic analysis, it will address the aim I started with. So do they work together? Do they link? So keep cross-referencing back to your aim and objectives.
I'll probably just, some people may or may not know, I don't know whose work I mark. So I have an issue about when we use thematic analysis and narrative analysis and all those things, particularly when we are investigating areas of professional practice or things that we've worked in for a number of years. Themes don't just emerge from the text. They come to the fore because of your previous knowledge or your knowledge of words or situations, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. That it's not just a case of this is brand spanking new. It's part and parcel of research, and that's where we all have a bias in research as well, because we're looking for specific things. So acknowledge that your previous knowledge plays a role in you unpicking the data that you've collected. And it's really important to do that, and more so for next year as well. And it's just one of those little, we all have our little things that we have. I've got a few. So just be aware of things like that. I've got a really good quote that's not with me that actually demonstrates what I mean, and I'll bring it with me on Tuesday.
Oh, sorry, Lisa, I'm not sure that the whistling's my end, or is it on your computer? I haven't got any whistling noise. I don't know if anybody else has got any whistling noise. Oh, right. I don't know what whistling noise that is.
Oh,
sorry.
No, I'm not.
Okay. So my computer overheating? I don't think so. It's not warm. I thought you were boiling a kettle. Oh, no, sorry.
No.
Well, I'll hope to squeak above it. Oh, sorry. I don't know why. Hopefully in the recording it won't sound so bad. So it might be a case of listening. Okay, can you repeat what you just said about thematic analysis?
Yeah, sure, I will do. It's just one of those things when you're looking at something through the lens of thematic analysis or narrative analysis or visual analysis or whatever it may be that you're going to employ, is to be aware that your background and professional practice or life experience even actually plays a role in how you understand the data you've collected and how that's sort of important, if you like. So just be aware of it, because it just doesn't emerge from nowhere. It comes from your knowledge base prior to that. And on Tuesday I've got a really good quote that demonstrates it, and hopefully that will make it a bit clearer for sort of what I'm looking for.
Okay. I know that's a great phrase, isn't it? The themes emerged from the data.
Where did they come from?
And people talk about that. There's one particular author that I like talks about it. It's somebody called Sandalowski. It talks about the quality of qualitative research, and she talks about emerging themes aren't submarines from below the water.
Exactly.
They are, you know, they're the waves that you already knew were there, or something. She makes some analysis related to the sea, but it is about, you know, and bracketing. Well, I'm not going to get into bracketing right now, but actually setting out your stall and saying this is what I know and this is who I am is part of the background, but it's also clear that you address that in your analysis and say, as a nursing academic, for example, knowledge is already there that I'm looking for, and be honest about it. Sandalowski, I'll bring the reference again. I'll share the reference with you. You Google Sandalowski on the on Primo or anywhere like that, you'll come up with. She's written extensively on what is validity and what is validity in qualitative research, and yeah, I'll give you her name next week. Okay, so any other questions on analysis? And you're talking about, in this section, you're talking about what you will do to the data. So you're always talking prospectively because you haven't done it. You don't know what you're going to find. But there may be some indication of what things that you think you're going to find because of what the literature said. And that's, again, you've already got that knowledge, so you know what's been found in the past. It's unlikely that you're going to find something completely different that nobody else has found before. So it's about how you are building on that body of knowledge and what you think you are going to add. Okay. So analysis. So I've put access and ethics together for no apparent reason, but access is something specifically that you need to talk about. And you'll talk about that in terms of how are you going to get to these people? How are you going to physically them? You know, you're not going to put a sign up outside a minor injuries unit, for example. You know, there's going to need to be more of a clear strategy to recruitment, and whose permission and who are you going to have to ask to get to these people, whoever it is these people are. So your participant, and how you're going to recruit your sample is an important thing to think about. And also physically where you've chosen to do the research and why you've chosen to do the research in that particular place, in that particular locality. Then describe, obviously there's going to be a whole section on ethics, and I am going to skirt over this very quickly because we're going to have a whole day on ethics on Monday. Ethics is, it is what it is. Understanding it is important. Understanding why are we doing it? And those of you who did the previous module with me, we did do a brief session on sort of basic ethical principles and why we are guided. And I think to most of it, it's absolutely obvious why people, participants, fellow professionals, students, whoever, need to be protected, and there need to be rules and regulations as to how we undertake research to ensure that it is valid, reliable, robust research that's not just being done for the sake of it. There is an aspect of the fact that you're doing this for an academic award that doesn't detract from the fact that it still needs to stand up on its own as a piece of research. It's not enough to say, oh, well, I'm only a master's student, so it doesn't matter. And that's why ethics has now been, everybody has to do the same thing, so that we have overcome that issue of, oh, that's just a master's student, so we'll ignore what they're doing. Because we've got to be very cognizant of what we're asking, who we're asking, why we're asking them, and what possible harm might we do by asking them that question? So we've got research governance, research rules that we need to follow, and every single project, without exception, if you are doing a piece of research, and obviously if you're going to do a systematic review, you need permissions, but you might not need ethics. Every other project will need ethics of some sort. Every single one. I cannot overemphasize it. People go, oh, well, I'm only asking the students a little question in session. You still need ethical clearance. You might not need to go through the full IRAS process, but you will need ethics. And associated with that, you will need a consent form for the participants. You will need an information sheet for the participants. You will need to describe how you are going to do it, what outside agencies and so on, and how you are going to communicate with all of these different people and what you're going to do with it and what are the reporting requirements. You'll need to demonstrate all of that information in your research proposal submission, that you've thought about all of these things in terms of ethical permissions. Say something else then, it's completely out of me.
I was just going to mention as well, when you say about outside agencies, it depends on your subject matter. But if you are doing something with patients that maybe cause them discomfort or distress or things like that, so if it's palliative care or, I don't know, something with abuse. I've got a colleague who works in sexual trafficking of underage adults. I know it's overseas, but under 16s. Ethics are horrific. But you also need to have the availability of, or think about psychological support as an ongoing thing. So I do know a colleague who interviewed Chinese Asian people dying in New Zealand, so they weren't dying in their home country. And the cost of the psychological support for her masters was phenomenal because it caused so much trauma. So you need to think about these things as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I know that somebody was talking about, I can't remember who it was, I'm not picking on you particularly, whether it was Tasha or, was it Tasha, that was looking at why parents bring their children to A&E departments, so on. Again, you know, what the ethical considerations there of, you know, asking parents about decisions about their child's care might have added complexity. So
definitely. Did anybody see that thing? Slight diversion, but Mind Over Marathon or something last night, because there's a woman whose child died and her husband committed suicide, and asking her about that and her responsibility triggered so many things. So absolutely, you need to be really careful.
Yeah. And the other issue, which I know Pam is going to talk to you about on Monday, but it's not something to think about as well, is about data protection, which I have to say that when I did my master's, and it wasn't that long ago, it was literally one sentence. Now it's far more complex about data collection and data protection issues and what data we have and why we have it and what we're using it for. So going back to earlier questions about accessing information, you know, you'll need to discuss what data protection issues that you might be coming across. Equally, if you are collecting questionnaires or collecting interview data, how you're going to secure that data, what you're going to do with it, how you're going to maintain its confidentiality, how you're going to protect it, how you're physically going to manage the actual transcripts. And it needs to be stated that you will keep these pieces of information in a locked drawer. Nobody has access. They will be destroyed. And so on. And although it sounds a bit, well, of course, you need to state that very specifically. So, you know, Pam's going to go into far more detail on Monday about all of these issues, but this section of ethics needs to be comprehensive, so there might be certain things that you'll need to state in the appendix. So access and ethics.
Yes.
What's that?
The conclusion recommendation.
Okay. Well, I've got recommendation and conclusions in one doc.
Recommendation. No.
I've got dissemination and recommendation.
Recommendations comes last, and then final thoughts, isn't it?
Yeah. So your conclusion of a research proposal is this section, and this is where you would describe in concrete terms what you hope the study will deliver and what you're going to do with this piece of information. It is not enough to say this is purely for a master's, so I'm not doing anything with it, because that's not a good enough reason to do a piece of research. So hopefully there is an idea that it might influence practice, it might influence your own personal knowledge and practice, it might benefit others by widening professional knowledge, it might have an influence to patient care, what might be the societal benefits, what might be the local provision benefits, and so on. And if it's a piece of service evaluation, if you evaluate the service and you find out it's not fit for purpose, what are you going to do about it? You have a professional and personal responsibility to action what you find out. So it's important that you articulate what you're going to do with this piece of information or this research once you've finished it, and how you're going to disseminate that information. And it might be simply that you intend to do a presentation in your local setting to discuss your findings, and that's what you hope to do. It might be that you would like to turn this into a journal article, and certainly once you've finished your research, the professors here at the university will be very keen to help you turn any research findings that you've undertaken into a journal submission. So, but it is important that in terms of your research proposal, you articulate what you're going to do with this piece of work when you've finished it. All in 3,000 words. We're mean to laugh, really, aren't we?
Oh, we've been there, though. Have we not?
We have.
We've been on the receiving end.
So, in squeaky presentation, that is your research proposal. And that is what writing a research proposal is all about. Have you got any questions? Yeah, absolutely, Claire. Easy peasy. It should be followed by a couple of exclamation marks, I think. Any questions? It's just sending me symbols now. Should there be any, Michelle, or what's your question about appendices? Is there a specific question you wanted to ask about appendices? I mean, yes, there will have to be, and any research proposal always has appendices, and I would expect there to be a sort of a set. There will be a Gantt chart, so a timeline of your research. You may want to put some more. So you may want to put some more information in your appendices about your literature search and literature summary or so on. So that might be your first one. Your second one will certainly be a timeline or a Gantt chart. A third one will definitely be an information sheet. There will definitely be a consent form. There will definitely be an illustration of your data collection tool or tools. So whatever your data collection tool or tools might be. So if it's a questionnaire, an example. If it's an interview, an example of your interview schedule. What else? You might want to do a flow chart of an inclusion-exclusion criteria for your sampling strategy. That might be a useful appendix if you haven't written it in detail in the text.
I would say anything that you need to tell us that you can't actually put in there. But no, I don't mean the literature review, but any of those other things that you come across.
Yeah, so it's your opportunity to give an illustration of. So you might say in the text, a questionnaire will be used. This is why I'm going to use a questionnaire. An example of the questionnaire is in the appendix. Okay, I'm going to press OK, but it's saying that there's a Chrome failure. I don't quite know what that means. I don't know if you're seeing this message on my computer. Okay, if the presentation side disappears or the webinar stops, I'll apologise, but there seems to be an issue. My computer seems to be playing up. So yes, Michelle, there will be appendices and they will include a list of the things that you've articulated there, consent form, information sheet and so on. Any other questions? Anything else? No, absolutely not. There's no set number of. I'm not going to make that. I'm not going to make that statement that you're restricted to just 5, simply because a research proposal is of a specific nature. So there will need to be at least, well, consent form, information sheet, data collection tool, timeline. So the minimum I'd expect would be 4. Others will need other appendices to support their research proposals. So no, I don't. If you put 15, I might start thinking that might be a bit excessive. So there's a realistic approach, but no, I don't restrict it to just 5. Any other questions? Okay, well, my voice has just about survived. So I will see you on, or not see you, but virtually see you on Monday for ethics. Over this afternoon, if you've got some time set aside, but certainly over before we get to Monday afternoon, start thinking about the ethical questions that you might want to ask Pam on Monday afternoon. That will be a very much student-led session. If you want to send the questions in advance, then great. I'll print them out for Pam to address online and for the afternoon, and so that she's got some specific, because obviously her morning session is very generic and there may be very specific questions that you will have for her, which may be relevant to others, but they might not have thought about them. So it's often useful to share some of your ethical questions. So please do send them in advance if you can, but have some questions ready for her for Monday afternoon. And that session, the timings of that session, as I said, I will send out in a news forum this afternoon, but the session in the morning is 10 till 12 and the afternoon is 1 till 3. And those are the webinars that are booked. And then certainly start thinking about your aim, your research aim and objectives. So have something written in preparation for Tuesday if you're coming. If you're not coming, still please do write something and send it, because we will hopefully have you there virtually via Skype, and we can address your particular aims and objectives at a point. And it's one of the really useful, which is why the group discussion is so important, because talking through other people's projects might illuminate some really, really important information for you, but they might also, help you with an issue that you might not have thought about yet, and so on. So it's really, really useful mechanism so that we can share and try and develop some really lovely research proposals over the course of Tuesday. So sort of homework for the next afternoon and couple of days is ethical questions for Pam for Monday afternoon, and outlining your research idea, aims and objectives for Tuesday's workshop. The Tuesday workshop starts at 11 and it's in room 206 in the Roll building. So Rona and I will be there from 11, bring coffee, and we will start at 11 o'clock and try and get some really good work done over the course of Monday and Tuesday. Okay, so any other questions? Otherwise I'll stop. Something's installing, so I'm really worried everything's going to crash. So I'm going to stop the recording now. The room number for Tuesday is Roll building 206. Sorry, mine went completely blank then. Roll building 206, but I will put this in the news forum email that I'm going to send in a minute. And the Skype links for the Skype link is my email address. I'm going to take my computer. So if you want to try and Skype me at some time in prep, then so that we know that we can talk to each other, then great. If not, we can work something out. Is Skyping easy? Yes, it is easy, Dawn, but if you want to, we can FaceTime, or we could, it's just so that we can have you in the room virtually if we can't have you in the room physically, if that makes sense. So we'll try. Sorry, I won't be in the office at 4. Maybe we could try Skyping on Monday rather than at 4 p.m. Okay, great. So I'm going to send a news forum just outlining timings and rooms for Monday and Tuesday. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attention, and I will gargle with alcohol over the weekend and hopefully won't sound so ridiculous by Monday. Okay. Have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Have a good weekend.